Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. Joining us is Bohdan Yaremenko, a former diplomat, a foreign policy expert and representative of Maidan of Foreign Affairs. And today on the programme we're going to be talking about the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine and the future of Crimea. Mr. Yaremenko, thank you very much for coming to the show.
Pleasure being with you.
So, first of all, I wanted to talk to you about the Normandy format talks. So we have the top ministers from France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine trying to at least calm down the fighting in eastern Ukraine. So what sort of progress has been made recently on this, and what sort of issues are they addressing in particular?
You see, from my point of view, the problem is that they're not really talking too much about the ceasefire. Especially in view of most recent statements from Mr. Steinmeier, the German foreign ministry, it looks like that they trying, or at least on the part of French, German foreign ministers and partly Russian foreign ministers, they're trying to be mostly concentrated on the issues of elections in their temporarily occupied territories on Donbas. And I believe it's counterproductive situation, because at first, as you rightly mentioned, they must be concentrated on the ceasefire, and not just the ceasefire, but also the exchange of prisoners. That's another key point for their whole process of peace settlement to be called a successful one. For now, we know that there is no such a thing as a ceasefire happening in Donbas, and basically this is the clear and basic violation of the agreement, which is taking place right now for more than a year. And of course, we're still facing a lot of difficulties in implementation of this. Also, another key point of peace process is the exchange of the prisoners. So we still, Ukrainian side, stating about 200 prisoners still staying in the camps, prisons, of course, illegally kept by these so-called authorities in Donbas.
And they were meant to be released, weren't they, by the end of last year? And this hasn't been done. This was one of the 12 points of the Minsk agreement.
Yes, according to the Minsk agreement, the negotiation of the exchange of prisoners were to start right after the ceasefire. So basically, and the formula which basically was created by the participation, the exchange of all to all sides. So, and it means that probably till the end of March or April last year, it was supposed to be implemented, because the Minsk agreement foreseed the couple of next steps which were directly linked to the ceasefire and exchange of prisoners. So far, I see no prospects of any positive results of the discussion of the elections in Donbas, unless the first couple points of Minsk agreement, so the ceasefire, the withdrawal of the heavy weapons and exchange of the prisoners will be implemented.
But surely you need more than this as well. I mean, for example, Ukraine meant to have gained complete control of its border with Russia again. And there's other points as well. So surely this happens to happen as well before the elections take place.
Now, that's an interesting point, because the text of the agreements, although there is no such a thing as the Minsk agreement, and we're talking about the couple of at least 3 or 4 documents, but all of them would state, or at least the last one, which was signed last year in February last year in Minsk, is stating that the elections should take place, or at least, let's say, if we will read carefully the text, it will tell that elections will take place first, and then the border would be, the control over the Ukrainian-Russian border would be provided or passed to Ukrainian side. So, and Russia is trying to make a point that it is exactly the order foreseen by Minsk agreement, and it should be done this way. But of course, it's nothing but a diplomatic trick.
Well, of course. And how can you have fair elections if there's a de facto border in the way?
Correct. And not just the border. You cannot have any elections unless you have all political parties allowed to participate.
Freedom.
Yes,
at the
freedom
moment,
of speech. If you have NGOs controlling the process, if you have media covering it without any fear, if you have, let's say, the legal system functioning over there, you need courts, you need police to control the security, you need stability, first of all. And of course, it's very difficult to imagine what kind of arguments the constituencies will be using while electing under their firearms pointed on them. because still we don't have any legal authorities over there, and everything has been taken care of about so-called militia,
well,
which is
happened before, hasn't it? When you had the elections in Crimea and in Donbas before, it was at gunpoint.
Well, right now it's even worse. Because in Crimea, let's say, there was no killings at the time of referendum. It was completely illegal from all points of view, but at least the people were not killed, at least in a massive scale. Right now, the people might be imprisoned or even killed and tortured, of course, just for being loyal to Ukraine. Of course, you could imagine what kind of results of local elections on Donbas we could achieve by conducting them in such a condition.
So we see that a lot more could have been achieved through these Minsk agreements, but recently Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the German politician, he was at the UN Security Council, and he's urged the members to actually support the Minsk agreement. So do you agree with him that it's actually the best way forward? There's no alternative to this way?
Well, as I see it, it's a kind of very difficult combination, a very strange combination, sorry, of being naive or short-sighted at the level of stating the facts. The German diplomacy normally is analyzing the situation as it is. But at the level of defining the strategy, it's really a weak point for German or French diplomacy. It's a wishful thinking to call for all parties to support the electoral process in the Donbas. But first, all parties must be concentrated how to push Russia to implement the agreements, how to push Russia to stop, let's say, the supplies of the weapons to Donbas, to withdraw its troops from Donbas and military equipment from Donbas. And then, only after this will be accomplished, and let's say, again, the exchange of the prisoners will take place, it's possibly only after this it would be possible to discuss any conditions or any processes, electoral processes, how better to suit them to the local needs, how better to suit them to Ukrainian legislation, so on, so on, so on. For now, I believe it's too premature to speak about the political part of the Minsk agreement until their so-called military part will not be accomplished. Or
actually, this is something I wanted to ask you today. You've been a diplomat for many years, and recently I was reading a book about the history of how Russian politics works, and in one of the chapters, it actually said that Russia rarely reacts to any international influence, but actually it needs something else, maybe an economic downturn, drop in the oil price, something like this, some sort of internal problem in order to react. So in your experience, is this the case? Or no, does international influence actually have an effect on the decisions of the Kremlin?
Of course, Russia is affected by all those factors that you mentioned, by oil prices, by international sanctions, because oil sanctions, basically the prices on the oil are reducing the cost that the Russian budget is receiving. And basically, this is the main source of receiving the hard currency for Russian Federation. And Russia, it's for more than 50% depends on the oil and gas supplies. But from the point of view of access to the credit, to their financial instruments, the sanctions are very effective, because sanctions basically putting an end for Russian attempts to get some credits and loans internationally to invest, let's say, in the oil developing or gas developing industries. And they're not capable of doing this on their own. They need money even to develop their military. They don't have enough.
It's not just the state that's sanctioned, but it's just individual companies. So surely they can find a way around this, can't they? Isn't it quite easy?
They're trying, but let's say when we have, when the sanctions are foreseen, things like the complete restrictions on their banking loans, it means that it will be very difficult to cross those lines. And there are a couple of other things, let's say the restrictions of the trips, which are basically not as tough from the point of view of financial influence, but very tough from the psychological point of view, which proves to Russia's top officials that they not as influential and not as powerful as Mr. Putin is normally stating that they are. Yeah. So from all point of view, this is a very unpleasant thing to be under the sanctions, and I believe it's in the best interest of the whole humankind to keep pressing on Russia to make Russia fulfilling its obligation and turning back to negotiations, to diplomacy, instead of wars, instead of aggressions, not just in Ukraine, but also in Syria, as we see it, and in many other countries.
Okay. We have about 1 minute left, so I wanted to ask you one final question, if you wouldn't mind, about Crimea. Now, very soon there's speculation that the Crimean Tatars Mejlis, the main representative council, is going to be banned. It's almost pretty certain, for allegedly being extremist. So what's the future for the Crimean Tatars, as you see? Do you think this will continue?
Well, it's issue directly linked to the issue of occupation. Russia is trying to, or have all the plans of trying to develop the Crimean Peninsula primarily as a military base. And of course, Russian Federation does not need any unloyal population at the territory of Crimea. So it's trying to push Crimean Tatars as the most united and organized group, ethnic group, religious group on the peninsula. And it's using all the instruments that, let's say, the Stalin regime or the communist regime would use against the Crimean Tatars or groups, all other groups. So they're under the pressure. I believe they're endangered by their, let's say, Russia's secret service, police, and unfortunately, should we not find, we mean the international community, not just Ukraine, find any solutions or any way of pressing on Russia to stop this policy, yes, they would be endangered as the group.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming into Viewpoint. This has been very interesting to talk to you.
Thank you for the invitation.
That was Bohdan Yaremenko, a former diplomat, a foreign policy expert and representative of Maidan of Foreign Affairs. You're watching Ukraine Today. Now, back to the news.